This is the perfect Power 7 for college football. Lately, I've been obsessed with the idea of a college football playoff that's free from rankings. And let me give you an idea of why. Tonight, we're going to have our first college football playoff rankings of the 2025 season come out. And in all likelihood, we're going to have Virginia, an 8-1 team out of the ACC that has no quality wins, especially after Miami lost their second game this past weekend, in the top 12 field, not just as a conference champion participant, but actually in the top 12. We're going to have Notre Dame, who's 6-2, who has a quality loss to Miami, ahead of that Virginia team for whatever reason, even though they have no more quality wins and they have an additional loss, and Virginia has beaten the team that they've lost to. We're going to have Texas, who's going to be hovering around, if not in the field, who has 2 losses, and really only quality win is Vanderbilt, who has fallen down since that loss and now has 2 losses. And that's just the teams that have 2 losses that are questionable in the field. At the top of the field, we have Ohio State, who's 8-0, but is really buoyed by their Texas win, which doesn't look as good, but it's somehow being made to look better week after week because we're in this eliminator field of just teams falling off. We have Oregon, who obviously I'm a fan of, but I don't believe is the 6th best team in the country, or maybe they are, but they really haven't done anything to prove that other than having a quote-unquote quality loss to Indiana, a game that I was at, which was not a quality loss. They played terribly that game. I think that they're better than that, but they played terribly that game, but I'm also biased. We have Georgia, who has survived multiple upset bids in the last possession of the game. Yes, all you have to do is win the games, but they're the best top 5 team in the country, and they're probably going to be maybe a little bit higher than that. They'll probably be 5 in the college football playoff. That doesn't necessarily make sense. BYU is 8-0, but they're behind 4 different one-loss teams. Why does that make sense? It's all subjective, and I think that one of the comments that I got on a recent poll was that Indiana would be number 1 if they had the same branding as Ohio State. And yes, that's true, but that's a very small version of that. Texas does not have a better resume than a lot of the one-loss teams in the country, but their resume gets boosted because they play in a conference that gets regularly boosted by the AP poll. And yes, you might be right that their top 5, top 6, top 7 teams of the SEC is the deepest 7 teams of any conference in the country. Okay, sure, but they definitely don't have 7 top 25 teams every single season, but they seem to have that. And that's this inherent problem with the rankings that's always going to come into play. And previously, when we had the BCS, we would have some kind of computer polls, all these stats that we could kind of break into that really have at least some kind of scientific method to it that prove which team is best. But we've gone away from that in a way to get more teams involved, in a way to kind of make it more fair with the 4-team and then subsequently the 12-team playoff. We've actually made it less fair because instead of having the reason that this team is ranked right in front of us, even if we don't agree with it, and even if 60% of it was based on human input, there is at least some computer input, some scientific input. Now, it's all decisions made behind the scenes. And we have things like Alabama being chosen over Florida State in the last 4-team playoff. And they would have had to make another egregious pick last season if it wasn't for Clemson saving the committee and winning the ACC championship game, so they didn't have to choose between a 3-loss and a 2-loss team from 2 different conferences. But we all basically know they would have chosen Alabama if it wasn't for Clemson winning the ACC championship game. So it's pretty obvious that you cannot leave this decision-making purely up to humans, and definitely not up to humans that get to hide behind closed doors and say, we're using these different criteria to pick people, but then they change that criteria every single season based on the results that we see right in front of our face. And they say, well, we're making the same decisions every year. Well, no, you're not, because we can say this does not equal this just 2 years apart. So we get to find out tonight what they're valuing this season, and we'll have to use that to kind of inform how they're going to choose the next couple of polls and then eventually, finally, the college football playoff field at the end of the season. So this week, I have 2 different videos that will be tackling this same idea. Today is more of the fun video idea. We're going to put 7 different 7-team conferences together for a total of 49 teams. And those conferences will play each other in a home and home series. Each team will play a home and home series with the rest of their conference. Those will be the only games that they play, and the winners of those conferences will be put into a 14-team playoff that we'll talk about at the end. On Friday, we will come out with a video that is a more serious video about how the college football playoff can use the BCS style rankings to have scientific elements actually choose who makes the playoff instead of a committee. But today we're going to do our 7-team, 7-conference setup and go from there. So before we start, this is just the team setup that I chose. I picked 49 relevant teams to college football and put them in a somewhat geographic setup. But the idea with this setup is that you could re-roll these 49 teams, or you could mix and match different teams that would be relevant for the time, who was ever the best kind of college football program at the time. And you can comment below who you think should be subbed in or who should be subbed out for this particular setup. And again, this is just my setup. But the idea is that you could re-roll this completely randomly because, I mean, it doesn't really matter where people are set in modern college football. Everybody's moving around everywhere. And whatever 7 teams you are placed with, you will just play a home and home with those teams, and that will decide who makes it in the playoff. Now, there might be some unfairness if you do re-roll like that, or there might be, some repeat matchups or whatever it is. But the idea is that your win-loss record is the only thing that gets you in the playoff. Nothing else. Win-loss record in your conference. You're only playing conference games. That's what gets you in the playoff, and we'll go from there. Here is my setup. Starting with the Great Lakes, we've got Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Cincinnati, Purdue, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Maybe there's some disagreements with Cincinnati and Purdue, but in the last 5 seasons, which is really what I generally use for these setups, is the last 5 seasons, everything post-COVID. That's kind of a rule of thumb for the world. Just do things post-COVID, and that's kind of more accurate than doing it any further back than that. Purdue and Cincinnati, one has made it to the college football playoff. The other one has made it to the Big Ten championship game. So they actually are, and when you go with Great Lakes or Midwest teams, they actually are 2 of the better programs in that particular area, specifically when we kind of condense it down to the Great Lakes. So they make it in there. Of course, Ohio State and Michigan are generally going to be fighting for the college football playoff spot here, but there are definitely, that's going to be true for any, especially Ohio State, that's going to be true for any conference that they're in. And then, Michigan is a good second fiddle for a conference. Michigan's fans might not like hearing that, but they definitely are the second fiddle to Ohio State, even if they're beating them in the rivalry. Next, we're going to do the Midwest, and this is Missouri, Iowa, Iowa State, Nebraska, Illinois, Indiana, and Notre Dame. Geographically, there might be some disagreement on separating Purdue from Indiana and Notre Dame, but it just makes more sense competition-wise for Purdue to be in there. Maybe you could swap Purdue and Illinois, but I don't really care about that so much. I originally had Indiana and Notre Dame in the Great Lakes division, and with Wisconsin and Minnesota in this Midwest one, but that is a very strong division, so it made more sense to put Indiana and Notre Dame in the Midwest. Missouri and Iowa State kind of play that second tier to those 2 teams, and then, of course, if Nebraska... Iowa State, this is a very strong conference top to bottom. It doesn't have the top end. Notre Dame and Indiana, of course, right now, Indiana right now is one of the top teams in the country. Notre Dame is, for whatever reason, in there as well. But they don't have, the blue blood program that has been consistently good over the 2000s. I guess Notre Dame is the stand-in for that, but really look at their record through the 2000s. They have not won anything since the 80s. So... this is but from top to bottom, this is a stronger division than the Great Lakes, especially with Purdue and Wisconsin falling on hard times. But either way, this is a very strong division. And really, the idea here is that every single week, you're playing a team that has the same level of competition as you. You're not getting to fill it in the ways that kind of the Big Ten has been recently, with having 18 different teams, and you can just make your best teams play the worst teams, which is the old SEC playbook from the BCS days. Next, we have the Texas Conference, which includes more than just Texas teams. It's Texas A&M, Texas, TCU, LSU, Baylor, Oklahoma, and Texas Tech. Again, this is a very strong conference from top to bottom. Maybe Baylor right now is not at that same level. TCU, I guess, is probably not as well. But they're still strong Big 12 teams. But really, Texas, Oklahoma, and LSU running the top of this division. Texas A&M and Texas Tech probably at that second tier. Although Texas Tech is probably the best team in this. Oh, no, Texas A&M obviously is. Texas A&M and Texas Tech are the best 2 teams in this conference this season. But in most seasons, you're going to have Texas, LSU, or Oklahoma as one of the best teams in the conference. And especially after you fire Brian Kelly, that makes your program so much better after you fire Brian Kelly. That is the best thing that you could do to a program that includes Brian Kelly at any point, is to fire him. Next, we've got the West Division, and this is USC, Washington, Oregon, Utah, BYU, UCLA, and Arizona State. So the real question here is Colorado or UCLA. UCLA is just more of a solid program through and through. Colorado has so many ups and downs. I mean, they were terrible before Deion got there. They were good for one season because Travis Hunter went and won the Heisman, and Shedeur had a pretty good season as a college quarterback. And now they're terrible again. I mean, terrible again. They're giving up 40 points a half at this point. Well, they're in their first half. At least they're not giving it up in the second half. That's because the other team has given up by that point. They're like, oh, we killed them. They're dead. We don't have to keep shooting. But that's why Colorado did not make it in here. UCLA, I mean, yeah, they're not great, but they're in LA. They have viewers, and they're not basically dependent on their coach to get viewers. So that's why they get put in there. Really, it's kind of the old Pac-12 plus BYU, like mostly the 6 best teams in the Pac-12 plus BYU. So that's what you get there. Cal, Stanford, Oregon State, Washington State, Arizona. Sorry, you guys are not in this. But again, in your particular setup, let me know who would be in the Pac-12 kind of setup if you were to cut up the top 7. Next, we have the Gulf, and this is Arkansas, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, and Georgia Tech. I know that the argument will be for LSU to be in this conference, Arkansas to be in the Texas or Southwest Conference, but I think that competition-wise, it makes more sense for LSU to be in the Texas Conference and Arkansas to be in here, because Arkansas is one of the bottom feeders to go with Mississippi State and maybe Auburn on any given season, but Auburn could also be one of the favorites in any given season. That is the magic of Auburn. It can suck or be great. It just depends on how much money they have that given season. But of course, Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, Georgia Tech are going to kind of run the conference. Maybe there's an argument to be made that LSU could go in that other conference, but I think that this is a very solid conference, and of course, Alabama and Georgia, most seasons are going to be fighting for the playoff spot. Okay, 2 more. Next, the Appalachian, whatever you want to say, conference. This is Penn State, Pitt, West Virginia, Louisville, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Vandy. This is the most interesting, I think, setup. One of the ideas originally came with the Power 7 or Perfect Power 7 was just to kind of cut the country in different kind of ways that make interesting conferences. I originally wanted to do that with the West and kind of put California with the Southern and Oregon with the Northern Conference, but it didn't really work out that way because it's so far. Like, even from California to Utah, or California... Yeah, I guess Utah is like kind of the next thing, Arizona to Utah. That is a pretty far distance. But then to go from like Oregon to Nebraska, to keep it a Northern Conference, that is so far. So it didn't really make sense to do that. But it does make sense in the East, especially if you kind of use the Appalachian Mountains as a guide. Because this conference is unique, but they all kind of play in the same area. I mean, Penn State and Tennessee, that could be a very cool kind of top-end rivalry for a conference on any given season. Then, of course, Louisville, West Virginia, Pitt, these are all kind of generally stronger teams that are not maybe kind of at the edge of the top 25 on any given season. So those are cool teams to put in there. Of course, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, historically are not going to be great, but Vanderbilt, I mean, like you see, I think Vanderbilt is really a program on the rise. I think that they're rising with their city. I don't know if it's just Pavia, but who knows when Pavia will leave college. So maybe just having Pavia as a franchise quarterback until 2040, that might be a valid strategy in college football as we change the rules every single season. But I think that this is kind of a fun conference, especially really buoyed by Penn State and Tennessee. But I think that, just kind of cutting the country in different ways makes sense for this conference. And finally, we have the South Atlantic. This is Florida State, Florida, Miami, Clemson, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. So this is like a dream ACC, I guess, is kind of the best way to put it. Florida and South Carolina joining the ACC is an interesting idea for like a future conference realignment. I don't think anybody's leaving the SEC or the Big Ten unless they're made to, but it could be in the next 5 or 6 years that it makes sense to have these deals that are maybe smaller conferences, or being the best team in a smaller conference might make more sense. Especially, I think that the ACC is not equally spread out as far as revenue. So I really think that these next round of deals might be very, very different for conferences. I think that streamers are going to come in. I think that cable is really going to die down over these next 5 years, even more so than it has in the last 5-10 years. So it's going to be interesting to see, Amazon, Netflix, these big, massive streamers, even Disney in a way moving away from ESPN, if they're going to go for smaller conferences, less content and more high-end content. That seems to be Prime's kind of approach to sports. Maybe that's just because that's what they can get at this point, but they just have the one day of NFL, one day of NBA. Maybe they'll go for one, like kind of how NBC has it set up, just 3 games that they will show each week. If that's really, you need a smaller conference for that. Otherwise, you're only getting a portion of the conference, which is not necessarily what you want. So it'll be interesting. I don't think that's necessarily what will happen, but it is a kind of place that it could go with the changes in how people are consuming sports media over the next couple seasons. Okay, so each conference will have 2 teams represented in the college football playoff. There will be 14-team playoff. So there's going to be 2 byes and 6 first-round games. Now, there will be 7 first-place teams, 7 second-place teams. We're essentially going to do this like the Champions League. We're going to randomly roll the 7 first-place teams into 1 through 7. We're going to randomly roll the 7 second-place teams into 8 through 14. 1 and 2 will, of course, get the first-round bye. The rest will be seeded, and we'll go from there. I know it's not necessarily the most fair kind of setup for that, or maybe there's a better way to, rank them. But again, we want to get away from rankings completely because we don't want any kind of human interaction with how these teams get seeded. I don't want any kind of political influence to get teams seeded, which is so much of what college football is now. We don't want any kind of political influence on where teams are seeded. We want it purely to be win-loss and luck-based, which is what is going to be. We're going to randomly roll it and play the 14-team playoff from there. So you'll have, 4 games in the second round, 2, 1. So it'll be a 4-round, 14-team playoff with 2 byes included, and the winner will be the college football champion for the season. Thanks for watching that video. Make sure that you like and subscribe and hype the video. I'm a small content creator, and I can use all the help I could get. The hype is the best way to do it. If you made it this far, leave a comment and let me know what you think. What do you think of the 7-team playoff or the 7-team setup? What teams would you sub in and what teams would you sub out? And then is there a better setup for the college football playoff portion of it instead of just randomly rolling the teams? How would you go about ranking them? If you want to watch more of my videos, I do have those for you. Over here, I got my video from last week, which is a conference realignment remix, which is if Texas joined the Pac-12 back in 2011. So go ahead and check that one out if you're interested in that. Up here, I've got my most popular video, which is my perfect Power 5. So check that one out if you haven't seen it yet. Other than that, I got my subscribe link on this side, and we'll check you next time. See ya!